Hey, here he is. Here's the pro. It's almost like you're standing right in front of me, but not quite, sadly. More's the pity. But anyway, Spain is probably the better gig at the moment, I have to say, because it is Baltic here. Freezing, -4 or 5, I think it got down to last night. Crazy cold. Anyway, I'm just going to manually watch you whack away for a little while. I like the fidget, I like the flow, I like the sort of just finding your feet, finding that little bit of groundedness. And last exploits, when you were live with me one-on-one, we were working out how to feel in your backswing, and although we're a little bit low down from the sort of normally like the hands, the camera set at about hands height when you're looking through the hands towards the target, or so the hands are more or less in the middle of the image, which is all right, but we're a little bit sort of downwards looking up, but we can cope. So that's my complaint for the day, over and done. But yeah, just wanted the chest to be sort of facing the ground a little bit more on the way back. Didn't want to hyperextend the right side, keep the right knee occupying the same space. And from this front-on angle, I think you're doing a decent job. Good, upper body rotation versus midriff versus feet. A little bit of softening of the left arm, which I quite like. Wrist hinge there might be a key to why maybe sometimes the face is open. We'll touch on that in a sec, but it also might be the reason why the club is overswung a little bit. So we'll come back to that. But I don't happen to think that you've given me too much to do because I know your origin story. So it's not like I'm going to be totally sort of starting from scratch here. So a little bit different for you and I than it might be for other campaigners. Anyway, to business. Let's get deeper in the weeds from front on and down the line. Now then, based on your goals, Maestro, setup, nothing obvious here. Let's run the rule over this a little bit in a few arbitrary ways, but shoelaces below the outside of the shoulders, a conventional stance width, four quick ways to reduce your mobility, which would be bad for generating energy and force and getting into the ball, would be an excessively wide stance. That would limit you. A very narrow stance would limit you. Excessively bent knees and very straight legs, all four those ways that I've just listed would limit you. You're not guilty of any of that, so there's no real problem evident there. Weight distribution looks pretty even. There's no kind of over lean one way or the other, but body shape wise, your left shoulder slightly higher than your right makes sense because your left hand is slightly higher on the club. You've got a lovely sort of outward or internally rotated right forearm, so the pit of your elbow looks out towards the camera. Very good, bodes well for a conventional backswing. You can see as the backswing starts, all right, that first move away, everything's a lot of togetherness there. The head stays very steady. A hint possibly that flexibility levels won't allow your body to your upper body to rotate versus your hips quite as much as we would like. So we've still got that little bit of a sense that the right side is quite tall and the left side's getting a little bit curved there, and the chest ends up looking towards the sky a little bit. But I'm drawing lines in there which are really, exaggerating that. You can, if you just wind that back, just focus your attention in on your left and your right foot here. You can see the way the front part of your foot towards the end of the backswing sort of lifts, and you roll your weight a little bit onto the outside of your right foot. Would still want to keep that right foot pressing into the ground, but I perennially, always, nobody really does this extremely well to start with. It's such a brief moment that your body weight is pressing hard into the ground by the end of your backswing. As you transition, as you turn hard in your forward swing, which is a critical part of generating force and energy, which we'll talk about in a minute, doing it from a position of instability with the body weight sort of erring towards the outside and the back of the right foot, I think isn't ideal, but it's better than it was the last time I saw it. The only other thing I would hint at is the sort of collapsation of the angle of your left wrist, which gives rise to a slightly longer backswing. I think with a slightly different wrist angle, your club wouldn't be able to travel so far. I'll explain more about that down the line, and I'll do more about that in a piece to camera when I get outside in a second. But again, the feeling of that alone might not be something that you particularly like, but I certainly think you'll want to have a play around with it and discover whether it can do cool things for you. But yeah, that really is something I will lump into the idea of how your club face might sometimes be a little bit open and how sometimes your club face might be a little bit closed. But I think you know what a square club face looks like at impact. It's not like we're struggling there. Now, just to kind of tie this up in a neat bow, your forward swing, and I'm delivering this quite fast because I know you can wind it back and watch it again. So that'll be the mode, just to kind of be efficient. I know that you can dial things back and watch again and digest things. You don't have to sort of absorb everything at a at a heady pace. You can go back and retread what I'm saying and what you're seeing, and see how that sits with you. And of course, if you've got any difficulties, then you can obviously convey them to me. On the way forwards, decent swing, head very, very steady. With an iron, you can afford to sort of lean into it a little bit more if you want to, but it's not absolutely essential. And that's certainly an action where the head doesn't move towards the target. That's very synonymous with a decent driver of the ball, so that'll make driving the ball well possible. But I think focusing on the left foot's behaviour, we see quite a lot of skid and slide around in the left foot. I slightly curtailed that sooner than I want. I think you'll see, if you look back at the first 2 minutes footage, where you see a little bit more of your follow through, then you'll see that left foot will spin out a little bit more, and that's a sign that your ankle, knee and hip can't take on too much pressure without trying to escape from the ground, and your toe and knee pointing broadly the same direction. I think that's a discussion we had in the past. I don't dislike it as a thing. I think it's probably more of a good thing than a bad thing, if I'm absolutely honest. But bear it in mind that that's a sign that your body's flexibility levels in ankle, knee and hip are just having to work around applying force towards the target, maybe a little bit more than in a perfect world. But it's a very, very common trait in all modern day players, because a lot is understood about how a turn needs to happen in the forward swing to get the club onto your right hand side to apply force towards the target. More on that in a second. All right, but on the whole, pretty good. Not a lot, certainly nothing in the way you stand to the ball that says you don't have a decent chance to create good impact conditions, the likes of which you're aiming for this year. So good from front on. Let's move to down the line. Now, the camera angle here isn't perfect. Actually, the first thing I'd point out is the back of your armpits is sort of synonymous with your centre of gravity. There's a point inside your upper body, not a very good circle there, but you get the idea. Don't want that to get too far out over your toes. And I think if the camera is a little bit more to the left as we look, if the camera were positioned a little bit further that way, looking more directly down this line you've got on the ground, which I presume is parallel with your target line there, but obviously the kind of foreshortening or the fisheye of the lens can sometimes influence that. But I think a little bit more stoop, a little bit more of a kind of angle forwards there, the chest pointing towards the ground at this point, possibly more than is conducive to keeping stability and balance from the get-go and throughout, is all I would say. But then that's going on a hunch. It doesn't appear to be directly, influencing your style all that much, but I'll kind of allude to what the possibilities are. Little bit of flair to your lead foot, which we definitely want, because without that it would be even harder to get that rotation in the forward swing. Arms hanging from the shoulders, nice. Posture generally pretty good, although I would argue maybe a little bit stooped, but not too much knee flex, not too little. So really, really good there. Butt just outside your heels. Kneecaps just sort of vertically above where the toes begin. These are good things. These are good signs. There's nothing there really that you could look to and say, right, this guy's got no chance. This guy can't expect to deliver a decent swing. So I'm not having that. But this isn't the perfect angle to draw this line. We're not quite sideways onto your swing as I would like, but we'll use it anyway as a reasonable benchmark. That's not a very good drawing. I want to go directly through the middle of the ball, straight through the middle of your upper sternum, which is about where your armpits are. And that's a good working example of a sort of an ideal biomechanical plane. I'm still not happy with the way I've drawn that. I'm going to get this absolutely as close as I can, reasonably can. There we go. Let's see where the club goes. Does it go on a journey around your body excessively? I think from a more down the line angle, if the camera was a little bit further to our left, that would look a little bit more like your left arm, your hands and your club head line up parallel with your target line. If you look at the way your body's positioned, I think that's a pretty on-plane backswing, but it's not carrying, and it's appearing to go under my line there because the line is drawn in keeping with a very precise down the line angle. And we're just a bit in front of you, the camera here, for my liking. So sorry to be nitpicky, but the club, again, as a consequence, I think, of the angle we're looking at it from, just a little bit above. But we can see the club goes a little bit long there. Now, have to say from this angle, just trying to see whether you're letting go of the club a little bit with your left hand. Maybe just releasing pressure in your hold there. Possibly. You'll have to look into that. But you see that? A little bit of flexion in your wrist, whether that's your fingers sort of changing the amount of pressure, sort of softening the amount of pressure in your hands, just to maybe try and get. But the big thing really for me here is the widening gap between your forearms. Now, Rory McIlroy gets away with it. Jack Nicklaus used to get away with it, but I think it's a source of potential inconsistency. I'm going to talk about that to camera directly when I get to describe it while I'm doing it, because I think trying to describe this while we're looking at static imagery isn't all that. So I'm going to talk about that when I get outside in a minute. Now, I've seen worse, but the right leg's still getting a little bit, still getting a little bit straight, and the left leg getting quite excessively flexed. So if we can if we were here and we kept this right knee sort of occupying that space, instead of moving towards the back of that circle and the leg straightening, I'd kind of like the knee to stay sort of touching that line, if you like. Or certainly something similar to it. And that would quieten down quite active legs in the backswing. You just don't need to be that active with legs in the backswing unless you're 90 million years old and you need to lengthen your backswing somehow, which you can see you don't really need to do. So it gets over length because your legs are overactive, and it gets over length because we get this separation between the arms. So having a ball between your arms, which I'll demonstrate, will be quite a useful exercise to get used to the feel of. All right, but you can still not skimp on your upper body rotation versus your lower body. I think that's still a good objective and still a good idea. Now, finally, and really with longer term thoughts in our heads, impact, if we're after force, not the greatest frame rate, my dear boy. I'd rather you found a setting on your phone that ups the frame rate a bit, but it is dark in there. I don't know whether this was the house camera that you were using, and as a result it's designed to take clear images at low light. But to be honest, your iPhone, if you have one, or your Android, should have a camera which is capable of capture of a much higher frame rate, and we'll get much more clear images at this moment, because at this point I don't really get the frame of impact, which I typically like to get. And before I sign off this indoor part, all I'm going to say is I think it's fair that just before impact, your feet are flat on the ground and your hips are basically sideways to the target. Your right arm has got a bit of flex in it at this point, but one frame later and it's long gone. And we don't see a great deal of hip flexion or hip rotation, and we still don't see your legs and feet have come to the party to try and achieve that. Now, some players can rotate their hips a lot, even though their feet are flat to the earth, so it's not a cardinal sin. But if I just segue momentarily to this collage of images, you'll see every man and his mum, with the possible exception of Nelly Corder there, the one I'm focusing on, bringing to the middle of the picture here. Her right arm is at its full length almost, and she's got a fair amount of hip rotation. We can see more of her left leg than we can see in the Leake example. But again, with Rory there, you don't see as much of his left leg as you do Nelly's, but you do see more of his left glute. You got Scotty Scheffler there, top middle. I'll bring him into focus. You see both glutes clearly, and you see a bit of flexion remaining in the right arm, and that's a very consistent trait. There's Bryson there, same things. So impact conditions, when you're applying really good solid force to the ball, and up here on the left, we have a rather pleasant to watch Cassandra Mayer. She's a world long driving champion, and or competitor, certainly. I'm not sure whether she won the world champs recently, but you can see loads of rotation in the hips. You can see both her glutes very clearly, loads of footwork, and a right arm that is almost L-shaped, and has loads of flexion left in it, loads of flex left in it, and there's Adam Scott below her. So you can see this trend going on across the board. That's Brooks Koepka at the bottom there, just in case you care. Ludwig Oberg, the probably future greatest of all time, loads of hip flexion, but feet still flat on the ground, right arm near its full length. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but we do need to see, you know, any extent to which we can push in this direction is going to be valuable for us, and that is another thing I'll touch on outside. So let's go to me in the outside studio now. And we're outside. Okay, now this post is actually for football training, John. In England at the moment, excuse the footwear, in England at the moment, in this cold weather, and the ground has softened up since this morning, you can stab this into the ground. Now, quite useful. If you put it into the ground in such a way that it will allow you to touch your right knee to this post, you can still make a fully fledged golf swing, keeping your right knee in touch with that during the backswing, as opposed to straightening that right leg, and that's when we get this shape. Okay, so anything you can fabricate, use your imagination. I'm sorry I lack the imagination to come up with something that will work on this level indoors. I can think of one or two things, but it might take a little bit of setting up. You might have to have an alignment pole lashed or sellotaped in some way to a small footstool or something, and then you could put that out in front of you. But basically what it would do is, I think when you practice this or rehearse this, you can do this with or without hitting your ball, but it just gets you used to your right knee occupying that same space. You'll feel a lot more torqued up. You'll feel muscles in here and in here when you rotate, when you spiral into your backswing and you keep that right knee in the same place. You'll feel a little bit more torsion, I might describe it. You'll feel, as I say, torque, twist, like a corkscrew, like a spiral. So resistance, you might call it, and that will help temper and give you the appropriate length backswing. So two ways your backswing has ended up getting a bit long and you've ended up getting a little bit off balance is when your weight goes this way, all right? So that straightens and this softens. And from this angle, that's when we end up with the chest looking a little bit this way. So that will give you that longer swing appearance of itself. It won't give you the whole story. So the other part of the story is this. I'll just bung this to one side. These are £10 off of eBay or Amazon, wherever you want to get one. You'll probably go to the trouble of sticking it over your head and wearing it for a lanyard around your neck, but I'll spare you for the sake of this video. We'll just grab my club. This goes between your forearms, okay? Now, when your forearms are gently pressing towards each other in a golf swing and you do a backswing, instead of that gaping gap between your hands, which risks the club getting a little bit across the line there, and will allow your arms to travel further across your body, couple that with this, and we end up slightly overswung. All right, so your backswing has a couple of bits of fat around the edges which aren't necessary, and and of themselves doesn't necessarily mean that your club face will have to be open or have to be closed. But I think those two things, and again, don't try and think necessarily of those two things in one swing, and certainly don't add on anything I'm about to add. This video is for the long term, and you can come back and look at each individual drill or exercise. Firstly, that alignment pole, if you like, or that pole that's touching your right knee. Number one, keep your right knee in the same space throughout the backswing, and that'll do a lot for you. Number two, practice with a ball or a cushion or a small volleyball between your arms. Probably not basketball. I don't know, you might be tempted, you being you. All right, but keeping those forearms together, all right, is reminiscent of the kind of action that you would use to stabilize a hammer in the up and down dimension when you're swinging it. So there's no real value to that other than getting your arms to go further across your body and round behind your backside. So that's why we use one of these, just to get that connection between arms and body. And you'll see me, I recently did a piece in Florida about keeping hands and body working together. So that's all cool. Those two things are well worth you doing because they will just make you more dependable, more consistent. Now, when it comes to this conundrum about the open and the closed face, I think when you look at that little bit of release and grab, I'm not convinced that I had the frame rate, or let's say I can't tell by just looking whether that's a sensation that you are remotely aware of. But I would say any movement of the club inside your hands would be similar to moving a basketball around in your hands while you're trying to shoot it. You know, once it's in the part of your hand where it's going to get shot, it's staying there until it gets shot. So we don't really want any of that. And that's just something I picked up on as a little nuance because I was watching it rather, scrutinising it to the nth detail. You know, I wouldn't typically always do that. And I wouldn't say it was necessarily a huge part of your swing anyway. But it's something I noticed and something I would ask you to contemplate in due course. But it's certainly not the mainstay of what we're about at the moment. Now, we know revving the motorbike closes the club face, gets the club face looking up more towards the sky, and we know softening that wrist opens the club face. Now, if we get a little bit this way, then we can recover from that position and we can deliver. So if I've got this collapsed angle in the back of my left wrist, that will tend to allow me to overswing a little bit as well. If I arch my wrist or bow my wrist, almost like that shape, right, then that will increasingly close the club face, as we probably know. And the journey from there to a closed club face at impact would be easier to imagine. If the face was opened by a collapsing here, perhaps in an attempt to get more length in your backswing, then I would say, you know, I have to say I wasn't surprised, but from front on, you know, you'd usually look at that slightly more acute angle here, and you'd either say it has to be because this wrist has collapsed, that we now have got much more flexion available to us and that angle's more acute. If I take that angle out, you see I can't get the club, there's resistance there, it won't travel further into the backswing. So I was quite surprised that when I looked at your hand here and I saw quite an acute angle. If you look back at the video from today, you look at that acute angle, I was quite surprised that when I looked at it down the line that this looked quite flat, because I'd expected it to look more like that, more open. Then you look at the club face angle as well, it corroborates the fact that we can't really say that your wrist has collapsed like that. So how does the club travel further? Whether it's that letting go and regripping that might be the culprit. That club's traveling almost, you know, a foot through the air just by the subtlest means. So just look into that for me. See if you're noticing you're letting go and regripping, and that might explain why we just sometimes early release the club a little bit as we're sort of grabbing it, as Jack Nicklaus used to say, grabbing it like that. So worth looking into. I need your feedback on that one because I haven't been able to talk to you about it. So it's something that it's real subtle, but we've noticed it. So anyway, I think the club face sometimes being pointing right and you're getting that push. Don't forget that a shot that curves is synonymous with a club face that isn't pointing in the same direction as the swing path. So a club face that's pointing left of the swing path will curve the ball left, and a club face that's pointing right of the swing path will curve the ball to the right. Now, for the time being, that's a statement which is the truth, but your pattern of flight suggests that more of the time your club face is getting a little bit too closed. So I wouldn't be working hard on figuring out how to close your club face more. You had it right, and sometimes I'm just going to be here to back up what you're thinking. The club face sometimes gets a little bit too close. I don't really see obvious and overt reasons for that happening other than just a slight misjudgment. It's like a chef putting a little bit too much salt in by mistake. Just, oh, too much, and, you know, we do it differently next time. So I think when the club face is pointing open, the ball's going to start right of the target if the club face is open to the target. But if the ball flies in a straight line, what that tells us is that the club face is pointing in the same direction that you're swinging. So, for example, you could create a hook shot and a push shot with the same swing path. The only thing that's different is if the face is pointing in the same direction as the swing path. So if I'm swinging out to the right and the face is pointing there, I'll just get a straight push. If the club face is 1 degree or more close to that swing path, I'll get a shot that doesn't start as far to the right, or could even start at the target. If the club face is profoundly close, it might even start left of the target, but you get more and more amounts of hook respectively as the club face closes more in relation to that path. So what's interesting is we look at your swing path on the way forwards and it doesn't show overt signs of looping over the top, and it doesn't really look like it's travelling from deep underneath.
but the hint is that it's traveling from slightly inside, because that's where you get pushes and hooks from, as just aforementioned. So I'm going to kind of suggest that I think the club face closing and opening, there's no obvious reasons in there that's happening other than just being a human being. We're not quite as precise as we like to be. I'd rather dial in on the perhaps third and final focal point, is that when you impact the ball, your hips are still roughly sideways as they started. There's little or no signs of any footwork. And your right arm and elbow, your right arm's nearly at its full length, and it's quite a distance away from your right hip. All of those players that we looked at in that collage, they will be more open, so you'll see more of their glutes like this. I hope my mic's working. I fear turning away from the camera because you might not be able to hear me properly, but I think this sophisticated mic should work. So your left glute and your right glute are visible. Usually most people would need to activate their feet and legs to turn their body. If you walked up to somebody in the street and said turn around, they'd activate their legs and feet. So I do want you to turn through. I do want you to practice this drill, all right? And I'm sure you can wind this back and watch it back, so I'll just do it once through. You'll stand vertical spine, put the club on the right-hand side or in the space on the right-hand side of you, not behind you, not in front of you, on the right-hand side of you. Flare that lead foot out a little bit. Use your legs and feet to activate your hips. Rotate your body. Keep the club on the right-hand side of you until the club is entirely square to the target. So I'll do that one from side on. I'll go this way actually. So the club's on the right of where I'm facing. Activate your legs and hips so the club stays on your right hand side the whole time and feels like it lines up. When you're there, a side bend will give you this enormous sense of a stretch in this side of your body, and there'll be another contraction above your right hip there, and that's a much more... Sorry about that, the phone rang there and I got interrupted. Sideways on, as I was saying, rotating, keeping the club on your right, side bend, big stretch this side, contraction that side. That is your most dynamic self. That's your most profoundly dynamic impact conditions, where you are applying the most force you can possibly apply. Without those signature signs, in all likelihood, we are squandering an opportunity to produce maximum power. So we need to get happy with the stretches and flexes and flexion that go into delivering that kind of quality of impact conditions. So I guess what I'm saying is go, if that's old news to you, and I've said that to you a lot before, I'm fairly certain I've said it a bit, then we need to go further with what we were doing. We need to exaggerate those impact conditions more if we want to see those full power shots. Might feel weird to you to have the club on your right, feeling like it's on this side of your body when you hit it, but I'm afraid that's what it takes. We can't have the club getting in front of us like that with our hips sideways to the target and our feet flat on the ground. That's just not our most powerful orientation. I hope you can think back to when we had an arm wrestle together and I put your arm out in front of you and you couldn't apply much force and you're trembling away, trying really hard but not getting anywhere fast. When you rotate your body, your elbow and hip, the whole right side of your body is closer to the ball by dint of just rotating. You can apply more force, so all good things. I'm not going to go on and on and on because I think some of that is stuff you already know, but I just need to push you to go a little bit further. So I hope that is a video that you can watch back and back again. So you know, we might end up sounding quite repetitive if the same themes come up. That's just inevitable. But I'm your accountability partner. I'm going to keep pushing you. But I'll deliver things quite quickly when I'm talking to camera because I know you can wind it back and you can pick the cherries out of it and you can pick the nuggets out of it and pan for gold and keep up the good work. All right, mate, I'll catch up with you again soon. Good to see you in a funny sort of way. Cheers, John.